Okay, so we're finally at the point where we can actually start working with Xen specifically, because obviously all these other videos have been covering prerequisites and setting up for it. Before we proceed, I should run through the fact that Xen can be affected by hardware, the environment, for example, its domain or operating system, DOM0, software that is installed, the source code that you're using, and of course, dependent packages. You only have control of roughly half of those, so you may encounter brand new errors that I haven't when you go through these same steps, even if you have the same equipment, the same DOM0, and the same Xen source or revision number. Now, this is actually zenbits.zensource.com, and we're going through the mercurial revisions. I have tried the latest one here, and it did not compile. It had a make error, which had to do with a variable that hadn't been instantiated but was being used. So I'm pretty sure that in a previous version of GCC it would have worked. In the latest version it doesn't, so I'm guessing at some point somebody will fix that, but it may be a few more revisions before that happens. So, what we're going to do is we're going to install some dependent packages, and that would be through aptitude. Now we are going to need bridge utils in order to set up the networking. Now, we already installed this in a previous video, but build essential is also part of this. Libcurses, libncurses, I'm sorry. -dev. We also need Python-dev. Again, these are things that I installed previously, some of them. So UUID and UUID-dev. We're going to need libglib, or libglib2 -dev. We're going to need libyagel. I have no idea if that's actually how these are pronounced, so forgive me for that. GCC multilib. This is on a 64-bit platform. I don't believe GCC multilib is needed if you're not on a 64-bit platform, but I keep it anyways. There are two different packages for libpci. There's also PCI utils-dev, which points to libpci-dev, so just an FYI if you see that in other guides. We're going to need mercurial, we're going to need flex and bison, and libio-dev. Now, my written guide has a list of dependencies as well that may be needed but should already be installed at this stage if you've been following along with the previous segments of this tutorial. So if you haven't, you might want to refer to the written guide. Okay, now we also want to install a couple of additional utilities. This is optional. If you are not using the GUI in Debian, your control OS, then you don't need either of these. But if you are and you want to connect with VNC over the network, or if you want to connect direct with SDL, then you're going to want these two libraries, libsdl-dev and gvnc viewer. Now, you can use the built-in viewer. It does work, but it's buggy, as is Xtite's VNC viewer. So I haven't used either. I have tested both of those. I'm not really as happy with them, so I installed gvnc viewer. The problem is when you resize the window, such as during a boot process, it'll close out the VNC console. SDL seems to be a lot more stable, and it is much faster, but the cost is that you can't use it remotely. So if you want to manage the system remotely, you're going to want to use VNC. If you want to manage it locally, for best performance, you should use SDL, but you don't have to. So, and obviously, when you install those, it'll install all of the dependent packages with it. So, there is also a very large list, like over 1.5 gigabytes of additional packages listed as dependencies in the latest Xen guides, or like I think it's RC2 test documentation, where they documented a list of packages. Over 1.5 gigabytes of additional packages. I don't know what they're used for. I have compiled without them several times, even this exact setup, and I've never had a problem where I required any of these. I will say that when I ran a configure, it does say that some of the packages are set to no when they should be yes, but again, that hasn't prevented me from compiling, and it hasn't prevented me from running virtual machines with pass-through, with networking, all that stuff. So I would think that if it was a problem, it would have come up at some point. But if anyone is reading the written guide, can chime in and tell me what I'm misunderstanding, or if there's specific performance benefits to installing them, I would like to hear. So next we're going to continue by making a directory inside of, you guessed it, source, and we're going to call it Xen. And I'm going to go to source Xen, and we're going to set our revision to 25777. Again, the latest revision of Xen will not work. It's a little buggy. I haven't figured out the exact details, but again, it's a make error. So GCC versions with Wheezy are newer, and nobody's really planning on them. So I'm sure it'll get fixed, but it won't get fixed for a little while. So we're actually going to go and copy this right here. And we're going to copy it to Xen unstable revision. Okay, so this will clone the repository for us, getting all the latest source as of version 25777. I can say that since RCE2 came out, I haven't actually encountered any errors compiling Xen, short of the latest one. So I've been actually very happy, because it's the first time since March that I was able to compile it without any problems. Just about every time I've compiled Xen, I've run into some sort of situation. So I can say this, be prepared. If you run into a problem, and you have a high likelihood of doing it, given my odds, then you may want to understand how to read make errors, how to work with them, and how to fix them. Obviously, Google is your friend, as is the Xen user groups, but they are not always a quick or easy response. So, there is one change to the source code I'm going to make for UEFI. If you're not setting up a UEFI Grub system, you're welcome to do an alternative and just omit this change. There is a way that you can build Xen.EFI in place of the Debain.EFI file that we have in the boot partition, but I haven't figured out how to use that, and there don't seem to be any detailed instructions regarding it. So I just use Grub, and I set the EFI flags. So the problem is that it tries to use a memory map called the E801 memory map, and it only sees about 511 megabytes of my 12 gigabytes of RAM, which is a serious problem because then I can't really run any virtual machines. So let's enter this directory, and what we're going to do is we're going to do vi xen arch x86 setup.c, and what we're looking for is something that begins with e820 underscore raw underscore nr does not equal 0. And that should take us to here. Now this has been in every version since back to 4.1.2 that I have tested, and I've had to do this to every single one of them. Now some of them didn't start with an else if, but rather just an if. So I had to actually change it so that it was if instead of else if here. But because they've obviously made changes to the source, there's now an if statement that's already in there, so I can just do this. If 0, which means never, use any of this, and that'll fix the problem for me. Now, I found this on Stack Overflow or some similar type of website. There's an article about it. Some guy solved it, but I don't know why it hasn't been fixed in the main source code yet. I don't know if maybe it's because they aren't focusing on EFI, or more specifically Grub with EFI. So, in any event, at this stage, much like previous, if you're running through SSH, you're going to want to run screen. Screen will allow us to obviously prevent disconnections from interrupting the compilation process. And in my case, we're going to do /configure compiling Xen will take roughly 7 minutes, or at least less than 10 in most cases. And I'm also going to set a flag of -J4 for concurrency. Now, you could just do make install, but I'm going to do make deb because it's going to make us a Debian package, which again, the source will take up about a gig, but the Debian package takes up megabytes, and we can copy the Debian package and make a backup of it, so we can install the same system from the get-go without having to compile, and it would be much, much easier. So, if we had to restore at some point. It also means that when you install through a .deb, you can easily remove it by using dbkg instead of having to remove every individual file or keep the source so that you can run the uninstall command from make there. So again, just a couple of options. So I'm going to cut the video here, and when we finish, I will come back and go through the details. Okay, so I ran an errand, and I'm back now, and it appears that the compilation is complete because we now have, in the dist folder, a .deb package. And again, it is 26 megabytes as opposed to the additional gigabyte that is now taken up, or 800 megabytes anyways. So what we're going to do is we're going to do dbkg-i Xen and tab, and that'll auto-complete it. Now this is actually not the last step though, because configuring Xen is a lot more work than it would seem. There's actually a lot of different steps we need to go through. So now that we have that, we're actually going to start by going to the boot directory here. Now I want to point out that we now have a bunch of symlinks, and we want to remove those because they're just garbage. As far as I can tell, they don't serve any actual beneficial purpose. And there's also Xen Sims, which again doesn't really serve any purpose. We're going to remove all those, and we now only have the new Xen kernel. And next we're going to go and move the new grub file, 20 Linux Xen, to '09, and what that's going to do is it's going to move it in front of it for when we run update grub, because this will generate the records for us. We need sudo, of course. This is going to regenerate our grub, and we're going to have the Linux kernel first in that listing. And the Linux, or I'm sorry, not the Linux kernel, the Xen kernel, and that will load Linux afterwards. So, now in addition to that, we also need to set up some automatic scripts that are now part of the system. So we're going to run update rc, and we want Xen commons defaults 2019. These may have changed at this point. You'll get errors. The errors don't appear to be functionality problems, but they are a problem for defaults, my bad. But they do have something to do with the system, I'm sure. So, in any event, I haven't had any problems with these commands, so I don't think it's a real big deal. Anyways, once we've run those, we now are ready to reboot the system. When we reboot, I'll be able to show that Xen is installed and working by running the XL tool stack. So that'll be where we pick up next time.